Hi there. In this section we're going to cover head injuries, epilepsy, asthma, anaphylaxis and diabetes. Now head injuries can be very serious and symptoms might not show up for a whole 48 hours after being hit on the head. There's two types of head injuries. One's compression and the other one's concussion. Now it's really hard to tell the difference between the two. But basically, concussion is when your brain rattles around inside your skull, and compression would be when you get a bleed on the brain. It has nowhere to go and it pushes and pushes until it bursts, and it can lead to death. Now the signs and symptoms, I said, it's very difficult for you as a first aid to be able to tell the difference. But you might ask some questions about their eyesight. Look into their eyes. Have a look at their pupils. Their pupils should ideally be the same size if that was normal for them. Make sure they can tell you how many fingers you're holding up. Can they follow your finger around the room? Ask them about their headache. Do they have one? How bad is the headache on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the worst? Have they been sick? Do they feel sick? Now, any child or baby with a head injury must go and seek medical advice. If you're an adult and you live by yourself, or if you're over 65, again, you must also seek medical advice. Other times where you maybe need to call an ambulance will be if the casualty's been knocked unconscious, if they cannot remember anything, or if they've got a skull fracture. And the other important thing to remember about head injuries, especially in a baby, is if they want to go to sleep and they don't normally go to sleep at that time of day, I wouldn't let them. Always keep an eye on them. If they want to sleep and they don't normally sleep, there's something not quite right. And always make sure that if you're looking after someone else's children, always make sure you tell the parents and carers about a head injury, because they might be sick later on in that night and choke in their own vomit. Remember, signs and symptoms might not show up until 48 hours afterwards. Now moving on to epilepsy. Epilepsy is a sudden burst of excess electrical activity in the brain, and it causes a temporary disturbance. Now, people might have different types of seizures. Someone might have an absence seizure, which just looks like they're daydreaming. You don't really need to worry too much about that as a first aider. The one you need to be more aware of is where they have a fit, a convulsion, where the muscles just involuntarily contract, and a casualty might just suddenly drop to the floor. The most important thing you can do is allow them to have their seizure and time it. Never ever restrain them. Always make sure you protect the airway and you try and protect them as best as possible. So if the head is banging up and down on the floor, try and put a pillow or a coat underneath it. Do not hold it, because if you do, they're going to have possibly muscle damage in their neck as well. Okay, so always maintain an airway. So if they're being sick or there's lots of saliva, try and clear that airway as best as possible by tipping them on the side. And you need to call an ambulance if the casualty is unconscious for more than 10 minutes, if they go into a second seizure, if the first seizure lasts for more than 5 minutes, if it's a casualty's first seizure, and of course always call an ambulance if you're just not sure what to do. Now when they come round after the seizure, they might still be unconscious. They burn something like 3,000 calories during a seizure. So during that time, you might need to put them into the recovery position, and I would also cover them over and protect their dignity, because they might have lost control of their bowels.